You stand in the stifling halls of a 17th century palace, where the air hangs heavy with the scent of unwashed silks and the murmur of horrified courtiers. At the centre, a queen, adorned in jewels that mock her squalor, reclines on a throne, her skin crusted with grime, her hair a tangled nest of vermin. She is a monarch who shuns the bath, her filth a defiant crown that shocks the court and tempts plague's shadow. Born from obsession or madness, her refusal to cleanse herself nearly unleashes a scourge that could topple kingdoms. This is the tale of the queen who never bathed. Her filth shocked the court and nearly unleashed plague. A shocking saga of royal decay where vanity and vice collide in a stench that echoes through history. Join us as we uncover the rot beneath the crown. You step into the gilded halls of a 16th century Castilian palace, 1506, where the air is thick with the cloying sweetness of rosewater and the undertone of something sour, something wrong. Chandeliers drip with candlelight, casting a warm glow over courtiers in velvet doublets, their whispers sharp as daggers behind jewelled fans. At the heart of the room sits Queen Joanna, barely 27, her crown a glittering mockery atop a head of tangled, unwashed hair. Her once pristine gown, embroidered with gold, clings to her skin, crusted with grime, and a faint stench wafts from her, curling the noses of those who dare approach. This is no mere queen but a figure of tragedy. Her refusal to bathe a defiant shroud woven from grief and obsession, shocking the court and tempting the shadow of plague. You clutch your satin cloak, heart racing, as Joanna's descent into madness unfolds, a tale of sorrow that stains the throne. Joanna of Castile, daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella, was born to rule, her blood tying Spain's might to the Holy Roman Empire. Married at 17 to Philip the Handsome, Archduke of Austria. She was a vision of grace, her dark eyes sparkling with hope. Chronicles, like those of Peter Martyr d'Anghiera, describe her as devout and intelligent, a queen destined to unify kingdoms. Yet in 1506, Philip's sudden death from fever shattered her world. You imagine her kneeling beside his body, her hands trembling as she clings to his cold fingers, whispering, "You cannot leave me, my love." Her grief, raw and consuming, became the crucible for her unraveling. As noted in Venetian ambassadors' reports, which detail her refusal to bury him, travelling with his coffin across Castile's dusty roads, her heart tethered to a corpse. The court, accustomed to royal splendor, watched in horror as Joanna's sorrow turned to obsession. You see her in a candlelit chamber, her ladies-in-waiting exchanging glances as she strokes Philip's embalmed hand, her own unwashed for weeks. "He is still with me," she might murmur, her voice a fragile thread, her eyes glazed with a love that defies death. Chronicles note her neglect of hygiene, a symptom of her so-called madness, possibly bipolar disorder or profound grief, as modern historians like Bethany Aram suggest. In an era before germ theory, where bathing was rare and feared to open pores to disease, Joanna's refusal stood out, her filth a stark contrast to the court's perfumed elegance. You feel the tension, the air heavy with unease, as courtiers step back, their noses wrinkling at the queen's scent. The palace itself was a stage for Spain's glory, its halls echoing with the triumphs of Ferdinand and Isabella, who united Castile and Aragon. You envision marble floors polished to a mirror's sheen, tapestries woven with scenes of conquest, and servants bustling with silver trays of spiced wine. Yet beneath this opulence, Joanna's presence was a growing stain. Her court, stationed in Burgos after Philip's death, was a crucible of whispers, as noted in contemporary letters. Nobles, clad in silks, fanned themselves to mask her odour, their loyalty tested by a queen who seemed to embody decay. You hear a courtier's hushed voice. "Her Majesty reeks of sorrow. God help us." His words, though imagined, reflect the shock recorded in Chronicles, where her filth was both a scandal and a symbol of her broken mind. Joanna's refusal to bathe was not mere neglect, but a ritual of grief, a rejection of the world that took her husband. You imagine her in her private chamber, a basin of water untouched, her reflection in a clouded mirror showing a face smudged with dirt. Water washes away his memory, she might whisper to a maid, her voice fierce with conviction. Historical accounts, like those of her confessor, describe her clinging to Philip's corpse, opening his coffin nightly to gaze upon him, her body unwashed as if to preserve their bond. This obsession, though tragic, horrified her court, who saw it as madness rather than mourning. You feel her isolation, her heart a battlefield where love wages war against reason, her filth a shield against a reality she cannot face. The risk of plague loomed like a spectre over Castile, a land scarred by outbreaks like the Black Death and later sweating sickness of the 1520s. You envision physicians in the palace, their robes heavy with herbs, warning of disease carried by filth. Chronicles note the 16th century fear of miasmas, bad air thought to spread plague, making Joanna's state a danger to all. Her court, packed with attendants and nobles, was a tinderbox for contagion, as poor hygiene could spark outbreaks. Per medical histories of the time, you hear a physician's plea, Majesty, the waters cleanse the body and soul. Bathe, lest death stalks us. His words, though speculative, echo the court's growing dread, their fear not just of Joanna's madness, but of the pestilence her filth might unleash. The court's reaction was a mix of pity and revulsion. You see a young maid, her hands trembling as she approaches Joanna with a cloth, only to be waved away with a glare. "Leave me to my love," the queen might snap, her voice cutting through the silence. Chronicles, like those of the Castilian court, describe servants fainting from her odour, nobles avoiding audiences, and ambassadors reporting her state to foreign courts. Yet none dared force her, her royal blood a shield even in decay. You imagine a noble, his face pale, whispering to another, "She is our queen, yet she smells of death." The court, bound by duty, was trapped in a dance of deference and disgust, their silence enabling her dissent. The political undercurrents were as potent as the stench. You see Ferdinand, Joanna's father, in a shadowed council chamber, his eyes calculating as advisers report her condition. "Her madness weakens her claim," he might declare, his voice cold, as noted in historical records, where he used her state to justify regency in 1507. Chronicles suggest her filth became a tool, proof of her unfitness to rule, allowing Ferdinand to seize Castile's reins. You feel the betrayal, the palace a chessboard where Joanna's grief was a pawn, her crown a burden exploited by those meant to protect her. The spices of this story lie in its visceral tragedy. You envision a moment at a banquet, Joanna entering, her gown trailing dust, courtiers coughing behind their sleeves. A lady-in-waiting whispers, "Her love is her poison," her voice breaking with pity. These imagined exchanges, grounded in Chronicles' accounts of her court's horror, bring the scene to life. The palace, with its gleaming chandeliers and rotting queen, becomes a metaphor for her fractured mind, a throne of glory stained by sorrow. You feel the tension, the air thick with unspoken fear, as Joanna's filth threatens not just her court, but the kingdom's health. This is the opening chapter of a tale where grief and decay collide, where a queen's refusal to bathe shocks her court and court's disaster. You stand in the palace's glow, watching Joanna's silhouette, her crown glinting, but her body a shrine to loss. The courtiers, their faces masked by perfume, hide their dread, while the spectre of plague looms in the shadows. As Joanna's madness deepens, the stage is set for a scandal that will shake Castile, a story of a queen whose filth nearly unleashed a scourge. Join us as we delve deeper into this tragic saga, where the scent of madness reveals the cost of love and power, and a queen's decay threatens a kingdom's survival. You glide through the opulent corridors of a 16th century Castilian palace, 1507, where the air hums with the cloying aroma of lavender oil and the faint, sour tang of dread. Crystal chandeliers cast prisms across marble floors, and courtiers, draped in silks, flutter perfumed handkerchiefs to mask a growing unease. At the heart of this splendor sits Queen Joanna, her throne a gilded cage, her unwashed skin a rebellion against the court's polished facade. Her hair, once lustrous, hangs in matted clumps, her gown stiff with grime, exuding a stench that drives nobles to the room's edges. In an era where baths are shunned as gateways to disease, Joanna's filth is a scandal, a walking pestilence that threatens to summon plague's grim spectre. You clutch your velvet sleeve, pulse quickening, as the court's delicate dance of cleanliness collides with a queen's decay, threatening catastrophe. In 16th century Europe, hygiene was a battle waged with superstition and scent. You envision courtiers dousing themselves in rosewater, their bodies rarely touched by water, as medical wisdom, rooted in Galen's ancient theories, warned that baths opened pores to deadly miasmas. Chronicles, like those of Venetian ambassador Pietro Pasqualigo, describe nobles layering perfumes over sweat-soaked linens, their cleanliness a performance of status rather than health. Bathing, when it occurred, was a rare ritual, reserved for moments of pomp, with heated water and herbs in wooden tubs, as seen in accounts of Ferdinand and Isabella's court. You see a lady in waiting, her fingers trembling as she sprinkles lavender on her mistress's gown, muttering, "It hides the body's sin." Her words, though imagined, reflect the era's obsession with masking odours, a fragile defence against a world stalked by disease. Joanna's refusal to bathe shattered this delicate illusion. You imagine her striding into a banquet hall, her presence a sour cloud that parts the crowd like a blade. Her skin, caked with dirt, harbours vermin that scuttle beneath her collar, a sight that makes a noble choke on his wine. Historical records, such as those from Peter Martyr d'Anghiera, note the court's horror at her state after Philip's death in 1506, her once regal form now a mockery of queenship. Where others dabbed perfumes to signal virtue, Joanna's filth was a defiance, her body a canvas of grief that repelled even her closest attendants. You hear a courtier's whisper, sharp with disgust. "Her Majesty's scent is a curse on us all." His voice, though speculative, captures the revulsion chronicled in letters, where her odour was as much a scandal as her madness. The palace, a fortress of Castilian pride, was a tinderbox for disease. You see its halls packed with nobles, servants, and petitioners, their breath mingling in candlelit chambers, their bodies unwashed beneath layers of silk. Chronicles detail Europe's vulnerability to plagues. The Black Death's shadow lingered, and the sweating sickness of the 1520s loomed, thriving in cramped, unclean conditions. Joanna's neglect, as reported in court dispatches, turned her into a walking threat. Her filth a potential spark for contagion in a time when physicians blamed foul air for death's spread. You envision a physician, his mask stuffed with cloves, pleading, "Majesty, cleanse yourself, or the plague will claim us." His words, though imagined, echo the fear noted in medical treatises, where hygiene lapses were linked to outbreaks that could ravage cities. The court's daily life buckled under Joanna's presence. You see maids retching as they change her linens, their hands gloved to avoid her soiled gowns. Nobles, once eager for her favour, now linger at the hall's edges, their fans beating like frantic wings. Chronicles, like those of the Castilian court at Burgos, describe ambassadors avoiding audiences, their reports to foreign courts laced with disgust. The queen's stench drives all from her side. You imagine a young page, his eyes wide, whispering to a companion, "She smells of death itself. How do we serve her?" His fear, though speculative, mirrors the court's growing panic, their loyalty strained by a queen whose decay seemed to mock their splendor. The palace, meant to dazzle, became a stage for horror, its air poisoned by the monarch they revered. Joanna's filth was more than a personal failing. It was a political weapon. You envision Ferdinand, her father, in a shadowed council chamber, his fingers drumming on a map of Castile as advisers murmur of her state. Her unfitness proves she cannot rule, he might declare, his voice smooth but sharp, as noted in historical records where he seized regency in 1507. Chronicles suggest her hygiene neglect was exaggerated to paint her as mad, justifying her confinement in Tordesillas by 1509. You hear an adviser's cold whisper, "Her stench is our gain, it buries her claim." This imagined dialogue, grounded in Ferdinand's documented opportunism, reveals how her filth became a tool to strip her power, her body a pawn in a game of thrones. The psychological toll on the court was a creeping malaise. You see a lady in waiting, her face pale, clutching a pomander to mask the queen's odour, her sleep haunted by fears of contagion. Chronicles note the court's unease, with servants whispering of curses and nobles dreading royal summons. You imagine a bishop, his robes heavy with incense, praying in the palace chapel, "Lord, spare us from the queen's pestilence." His words, though speculative, reflect the era's blend of faith and fear, where filth was seen as a moral failing, a sign of divine displeasure. The court, bound by duty, was trapped in a paradox, serving a queen whose decay threatened their lives, their silence a shield that enabled her decline. The spectre of plague hung heavy, a threat that turned Joanna's personal tragedy into a public menace. You envision physicians pacing the palace, their journals filled with warnings of bad air spreading death, as seen in medical texts of the time. Historical records note outbreaks in Castile, with crowded courts amplifying risks. Joanna's state, as reported in Tordesillas later, made her chambers a breeding ground for disease, her attendants falling ill from proximity. You hear a servant's desperate plea, "Her filth will kill us all. God save the kingdom." Her words, though imagined, capture the dread chronicled in court letters, where fear of plague fueled calls for her isolation, a queen too dangerous to rule. The spices of this story lie in its visceral tension. You envision a moment as Joanna enters a council, her gown trailing dust, courtiers gagging behind silk sleeves, a noble mutters, "Her love rots us all," his voice laced with pity and fear. These imagined exchanges, rooted in Chronicles' accounts of court revulsion, paint a vivid scene. The palace, with its perfumed airs and shadowed corners, becomes a metaphor for denial, a glittering facade hiding a queen's decay and a kingdom's peril. You feel the weight of their horror, the air thick with the clash of duty and disgust, as Joanna's filth threatens to unravel the court's delicate balance. This is the second chapter of a tale where sorrow and pestilence intertwine, where a queen's unwashed body shocks her court and court's disaster. You stand in the palace's glow, watching Joanna's silhouette, her crown gleaming, but her presence a harbinger of decay. The courtiers, their perfumes failing, brace for the plague her filth might unleash, while Ferdinand plots to bury her reign. As her stench fills the halls, the stage is set for a deeper descent, into the grief that fuels her madness, and the kingdom that trembles under its weight. You linger in the dim glow of a 16th century Castilian palace, 1507, where candlelight dances on gilded walls, but a sour stench cuts through the perfumed air. Queen Joanna, only 27, sits alone in a shadowed chamber, her unwashed hands clutching a velvet shroud that once draped her husband's coffin. Her eyes, hollow with loss, stare at nothing, her matted hair a crown of sorrow, the court beyond whispers of madness. But here, in this suffocating stillness, her filth is no mere neglect. It's a shrine to Philip the Handsome, whose death shattered her soul. Her refusal to bathe, a defiance of life itself, horrifies her attendants, their pleas drowned by her grief's relentless grip. You grip your cloak, heart aching, as Joanna's descent unfolds, her stench a testament to love's ruin and a kingdom's peril. Joanna's world collapsed when Philip died of fever in 1506, leaving her a widow at 26. You envision her kneeling by his body in Burgos, her fingers tracing his cold face, her voice a broken whisper. You promised forever, my love. Chronicles, like those of Peter Martí d'Anghiera, describe her obsession. She refused to bury him, travelling with his coffin across Castile's rugged hills, opening it nightly to gaze upon his decaying form. Her hygiene, once meticulous, crumbled as grief consumed her, a detail noted in Venetian ambassadors' reports. Modern historians, like Bethany Aram, suggest her madness was profound grief, possibly amplified by bipolar disorder, turning her body into a vessel of mourning. Her filth, a refusal to cleanse Philip's memory, became a physical echo of her shattered heart. The court's attempts to intervene were futile. You see a lady in waiting, Catalina, approaching with a silver basin, her voice soft. Majesty, let us wash away your sorrow. Joanna's glare, fierce and unyielding, stops her cold. Water steals his touch. Leave me. This imagined exchange, rooted in Chronicles' accounts of her resistance, captures her conviction. Court records note maids offering scented cloths, physicians urging baths to purge melancholy. But Joanna, clutching relics of Philip, a ring, a lock of hair, rejected all. Her obsession, as reported by her confessor, was not just love but paranoia, fearing enemies would steal his body. You feel her anguish, her filth a deliberate armor, shielding her from a world that moved on without him. Her psychological descent was a labyrinth of pain. You envision her pacing her chamber, the air thick with dust, her thoughts spiraling. If I stay as he left me, he remains. Historical accounts describe her insomnia, her refusal to eat, her fixation on Philip's corpse as a refusal to accept death. This wasn't mere madness, but a desperate bid to preserve love. Her unwashed state, a ritual to defy time. Chronicles note her courtiers' despair, their loyalty, tested by a queen who seemed to court death itself. You imagine her staring into a cracked mirror, her reflection a ghost. I am his, still. Her words, though speculative, echo the torment of a mind trapped in grief's endless loop. Her body a canvas of loss. The court's horror grew with each failed intervention. You see a physician, his hands trembling, presenting a tonic to cleanse her humours, only to be dismissed with a wave. Chronicles, like those from Burgos, describe nobles recoiling as Joanna's stench filled audiences, their fear of her madness mingling with dread of disease. In a plague-ravaged era, her state was a ticking threat. As noted in medical texts warning of filth's link to miasmas, you hear a noble's hushed plea, she'll doom us all with her decay. His voice, though imagined, reflects the court's panic, their efforts to save her thwarted by her royal will and their own deference. Before we sink deeper into this tragedy, pause and let it sink in. If Joanna's grief grips you, hit that like button and subscribe to uncover more hidden histories. Share your thoughts below. Does her pain break your heart, or does her filth shock you? These stories bridge centuries, showing love's cost in a queen's ruin. Now, as her stench spreads, the court braces for what's next. The political stakes sharpened the court's desperation. You envision Ferdinand, Joanna's father, in a candlelit council, his eyes gleaming as he learns of her state. Her madness hands me Castile, he might murmur, as chronicles document his 1507 power grab, using her condition to justify regency. Her filth, a visible sign of unfitness, was a gift to his ambition, as noted in court letters. You feel the betrayal, her grief weaponized to strip her crown, her body a pawn in a dynasty's game. The court, complicit in its silence, enabled this, their fear of plague and loyalty to Ferdinand sealing Joanna's fate. The spices of this story lie in its raw emotion. You imagine Joanna clutching Philip's ring, her voice fierce, "No water will part us." A maid's reply, soft with pity, "Majesty, you drown in him." These imagined moments, grounded in Chronicles' accounts of her obsession, paint a vivid portrait. The palace, its golden halls dimmed by her presence, becomes a metaphor for her mind, a labyrinth where love traps her in decay. You sense the weight of her sorrow, the air thick with loss, as her refusal to bathe becomes a cry against a world that stole her heart. This is the heart of a tale where love and madness collide, where a queen's filth is both shield and shackle. You stand in her chamber's shadows watching Joanna's silhouette, her unwashed hands clutching memories of Philip. The court, desperate to save her, falters under her grief's weight, while Ferdinand plots to bury her reign. As her stench grows, the spectre of plague looms, setting the stage for a court unravelling in horror and a kingdom teetering on the edge. You hover in the flickering glow of a 16th century Castilian palace, 1508, where the scent of myrrh battles a rancid undercurrent that seeps from the royal chambers. Courtiers, their silks gleaming, cluster at the hall's edges, their faces pale behind perfumed veils, eyes darting toward Queen Joanna. At 28, she sits rigid on her throne, her gown a patchwork of grime, her skin a canvas of neglect that harbours crawling shadows. Her stench, a sour wave, drives maids to retch and nobles to flee, their loyalty buckling under the weight of revulsion. Yet none can act, their hands tied by her crown, and their fear of the plague her filth invites. You grip your cloak, stomach churning, as the court's horror unfolds, a queen's decay, a political pawn in a game that threatens to unravel a kingdom. The court's daily life was a torment of disgust and dread. You see a young maid, Maria, her hands trembling as she approaches Joanna with fresh linens, only to gag as the queen's odour hits, a mix of sweat, dust and decay. Chronicles, like those of Peter Martyr d'Anghiera, describe servants fainting from her stench, their tasks a trial of endurance. Nobles, once vying for her favour, now avoid audiences, their excuses thin as the silk fans they clutch. You hear a lord's hushed complaint, Her Majesty's reek is a plague itself. His words, though imagined, echo reports from Venetian ambassadors, who noted courtiers fleeing Joanna's presence in Burgos, their deference strained by a queen who seemed to embody death. Interventions faltered against Joanna's royal will. You envision a physician, his robes heavy with cloves, offering a basin of rose-scented water. Majesty, cleanse for your health. Joanna's reply, sharp as a blade, cuts through. My body is his shrine, touch it not. This imagined dialogue, rooted in Chronicles' accounts of her resistance, captures her refusal to part with Philip's memory, her filth a sacred vow. Court records note priests urging repentance, maids pleading for baths, but Joanna, her eyes burning with grief, rebuffed all. Her attendants, powerless before her rank, could only watch as her decay deepened, their efforts buried under her obsession, as reported in dispatches from 1507, 1508. The political exploitation of her state was ruthless. You see Ferdinand, Joanna's father, in a firelit council, his smile cold as he reads reports of her condition. Her filth proves her unfit, he might declare, his voice smooth, as chronicles document his campaign to seize Castile's regency in 1507. Historical records, like those from the court at Tordesillas, show him spreading tales of her madness, her stench a convenient proof to justify her confinement by 1509. You imagine an advisor, his tone sly. Her odour hands us the crown. This speculative exchange reflects Ferdinand's documented opportunism, using Joanna's grief to paint her as a ruler too broken to reign, her body a tool to secure his power. The human cost to her attendants was crushing. You see Maria, the maid, her eyes red from sleepless nights, whispering to a companion, I serve a queen who reeks of death. How long until it claims us? Her fear, though imagined, mirrors Chronicles' accounts of servants' despair, their health and spirits worn by proximity to Joanna's decay. In an era when plague was blamed on foul air, as noted in medical texts, her attendants faced real danger, their gloves and masks feeble against the risk. You envision a nurse, collapsing after changing Joanna's bedding, her cough a grim omen of the pestilence feared by all. The court, bound to serve, was trapped in a cycle of revulsion and duty, their silence enabling her downfall. The psychological toll rippled through the palace. You see a young page, his hands shaking as he pours wine, haunted by Joanna's presence. Her stench follows me, even in dreams. Chronicles describe the court's growing paranoia, fearing not just plague but divine judgment for serving a queen so lost. You imagine a bishop, his voice faltering in the chapel. Her filth is our sin, God sees all. His words, though speculative, reflect the era's belief that a monarch's state mirrored the kingdom's soul. As noted in Castilian sermons, the court, caught between loyalty and horror, became a prison of whispers, their fear of Joanna's decay as potent as her grief. The spices of this story lie in its raw horror. You envision a moment as Joanna enters a banquet, her gown trailing filth, a noble choking on his goblet. She brings death to our table. A maid's reply, soft with pity, her heart died with him. These imagined exchanges, grounded in Chronicles' accounts of court revulsion, paint a vivid scene. The palace, its splendor dimmed by her presence, becomes a metaphor for betrayal, a throne of glory tainted by a queen's ruin. You sense the dread, the air thick with the clash of duty and disgust, as Joanna's filth becomes a weapon against her reign. This is a chapter of sorrow and scheming, where a queen's decay horrifies her court and fuels her father's ambition. You stand in the palace's shadows, watching Joanna's silhouette, her crown gleaming but her body a harbinger of plague. The courtiers, their faces masked by perfume, recoil in helpless horror, while Ferdinand weaves her stench into a noose for her power. As the palace chokes on her presence, the stage is set for the looming spectre of disease, a threat that could consume Castile in its queen's wake. You stand in the oppressive gloom of Tordesillas Castle, 1510, where the air is choked with the rancid odour of Queen Joanna's unwashed body, a sour miasma that clings to the stone walls. At 29, she sits in a darkened chamber, her matted hair a nest of vermin, her gown a shroud of filth that repels even the bravest maids. Outside, the Castilian sky looms grey, as if mirroring the court's dread of the plague her decay seems to summon. Servants cough in the corridors, their faces pale with fear, while physicians whisper of pestilence lurking in her stench. Her father, Ferdinand, watches from afar, his ambition weaving her ruin into a cage of confinement. You clutch your cloak, dread rising, as Joanna's filth threatens to unleash a scourge, her tragedy a spark that could burn a kingdom to ash. The 16th century was a battleground against disease, with plagues like the sweating sickness and remnants of the Black Death stalking Europe. You envision physicians pacing the castle, their masks stuffed with herbs, their journals warning of miasmas, foul air believed to carry death, as noted in medical texts of the time. Joanna's neglect, chronicled in reports from Tordesillas, turned her chambers into a breeding ground for contagion, her unwashed state a peril in a crowded court. Historical records note outbreaks in Castile, with the 1520s seeing fevers that killed thousands, amplified by poor hygiene. You hear a physician's urgent plea. Her filth invites the plague, seal her chambers. His words, though imagined, echo the fear in court dispatches, where her condition was a ticking threat to all. Failed quarantines heightened the panic. You see guards barring Joanna's door, their hands gloved, their eyes darting as they enforce a half-hearted isolation. Chronicles describe attempts to limit her contact, with servants assigned despite risks, their health faltering under her stench. A maid, coughing as she delivers bread, might whisper, "Her decay will kill us all." This imagined scene, rooted in accounts of Tordesillas' sickly court, captures the dread of contagion. Historical records note attendants falling ill, their fevers blamed on the Queen's miasma, as physicians struggled with remedies, herbs, bleedings, that failed against the era's ignorance. The castle, meant to contain her madness, became a crucible where her filth fanned fears of a new plague. Court illnesses spread like whispers of doom. You envision a lady in waiting, her face flushed with fever, collapsing after tending Joanna, her cough echoing in the halls. Chronicles, like those of Peter Marta d'Anghiera, report sickness among her staff, with some attributing it to her unwashed presence. In a time when hygiene was a mystery, as medical histories show, her chambers were a petri dish, her vermin-ridden gowns a vector for disease. You hear a noble's desperate murmur, her stench is death's herald. His voice, though speculative, reflects the court's terror, their fear not just of Joanna's madness, but of the pestilence her body seemed to court, threatening to spill beyond the castle walls. Ferdinand's exploitation was cold and calculated. You see him in Valladolid, his eyes sharp as he reads reports of Joanna's state, his lips curling. Her filth seals her fate. Chronicles document his 1509 decision to confine her in Tordesillas, citing her madness and the health risks she posed. Historical records, like those from Castilian councils, show him framing her as a danger to justify his regency. Her stench a convenient excuse to lock her away. You imagine an advisor's sly counsel. Let her decay bury her crown. This speculative dialogue captures Ferdinand's documented opportunism, using her condition to cement his rule. Her confinement a prison built on her grief and the court's fear. Joanna's long confinement stretched from 1509 to her death in 1555, a half-century of isolation. You envision her in Tordesillas' bleak chambers, her world shrinking to stone walls and memories of Philip. Chronicles note her sporadic lucidity, as in a 1510 trial declaring her sane, yet ignored by Ferdinand and later Charles V. Her filth, though less documented later, remained a symbol of her ruin, as reported by rare visitors. You hear her whisper, faint and broken, "I am queen, yet caged." Her words, though imagined, echo the tragedy of a ruler reduced to a spectre, her decay a chain forged by grief and betrayal. The spices of this story lie in its chilling urgency. You envision a moment as a servant flees Joanna's chamber, coughing, her voice trembling. "Her stench is a curse." A physician's reply, grim. "It's no curse, but plague's shadow." These imagined exchanges, grounded in Chronicles' accounts of court panic, paint a vivid scene. The castle, its air thick with dread, becomes a metaphor for Joanna's fate. A prison where love and filth entwine, threatening ruin. You sense the terror, the court teetering on the edge of catastrophe, as her decay becomes a harbinger of death. This is a chapter of peril and betrayal, where a queen's filth summons plague's spectre and seals her doom. You stand in Tordesillas' shadows, watching Joanna's silhouette, her crown a mockery amid her decay. The court, gripped by fear, falls to sickness, while Ferdinand builds her prison from her ruin. As plague looms, the stage is set for her legacy, a tale of a queen whose grief nearly unleashed a scourge, forever staining Castile's throne. Echoes of decay, legacy, and the myth of the Mad Queen. You stand in the crumbling shadows of Tordesillas Castle, 1555, where the wind carries the faint stench of a tragedy long buried. The once grand halls, now cloaked in dust, whisper of Queen Joanna, her unwashed form a ghost in these stone corridors. At 75, she lies dying, her body still unbathed, her mind a maze of grief for Philip, dead nearly half a century. Her filth, once a court scandal, now lingers as a legend, her name synonymous with madness, yet echoing with unheeded strength. The kingdom she was meant to rule thrives under her son, Charles V, but her legacy, tainted by confinement and myth, haunts Castile's soul. You clutch your cloak, heart heavy as Joanna's story unfolds, a tale of sorrow that reshaped a dynasty and warns of power's cruel chains. Joanna's legacy is a tapestry of tragedy and resilience. You envision scribes in candlelit chambers, their quills etching her tale as the Mad Queen, a label cemented by her father, Ferdinand, to justify her confinement from 1509 to 1555. Chronicles, like those of Peter Martyr d'Anghiera, paint her as a broken ruler, her filth and obsession with Philip's corpse proof of insanity. Yet a 1510 trial, noted in court records, declared her sane, a truth ignored by Ferdinand and Charles V to secure their rule. You imagine a scribe, his hand trembling. She was queen, yet caged for love. Her nominal reign, spanning 1504 to 1555, birthed the Habsburg dynasty through her children. But her personal cost, a life locked in Tordesillas, became a symbol of sacrifice. As modern historians like Bethany Aram argue, debunking the myths reveals a woman wronged. You see a historian in 2025 poring over faded letters, shaking her head at exaggerated tales of Joanna's madness. Chronicles, often penned by Ferdinand's allies, inflated her filth and grief to vilify her, framing her as unfit to rule. Venetian dispatches sensationalized her coffin travels, but modern scholars suggest her behavior was profound grief, possibly bipolar disorder, not lunacy. You hear the historian murmur, "They called her mad to steal her crown." Her refusal to bathe, though shocking, was a symptom of loss, not a demonic curse, as some clerics claimed. The truth, buried by political agendas, paints Joanna as a queen betrayed, her legacy distorted to serve power's needs. The court's complicity left scars. You envision a former maid, now old, standing outside Tordesillas, her eyes wet. We served her in silence, fearing her stench. Her words, though imagined, echo Chronicles' accounts of attendants' guilt, their lives marked by proximity to a queen whose decay they couldn't halt. Historical records note courtiers' remorse after her death, some questioning Ferdinand's motives. The palace, once a stage for their silence, became a monument to their failure, as noted in Castilian sermons lamenting a queen lost to sorrow. You feel their regret, the weight of a court that watched a woman drown in grief, their hands tied by fear and loyalty. The kingdom bore the weight of her story. You hear villagers in Castile's markets decades later, whispering, "Joanna's filth nearly cursed us with plague." Chronicles, like those of the 16th century, show her tale fueling public distrust of royal power, her confinement a spark for later reforms. Her son, Charles V, unified Spain and the Holy Roman Empire. But her suffering lingered as a cautionary legend, as seen in Spanish ballads. You imagine a peasant, his voice low. Her love brought us low, yet her blood rules. Her legacy, though tainted, shaped Spain's golden age, her sacrifice a silent foundation for its glory. Modern parallels sharpen her tragedy's edge. You see echoes in today's mental health stigma, where grief or illness is weaponized to silence. As noted in reports by organizations like the WHO, women, especially, face scrutiny for emotional excess, much like Joanna, whose mourning was branded madness to strip her power. You hear a modern therapist reading her story say, "Her grief was human, not insanity." This imagined reflection ties her to contemporary struggles, where patriarchal systems still cage the vulnerable. Her filth, a cry of defiance, warns against dismissing pain as weakness, urging us to challenge power's chains. The spices of this story lie in its haunting resonance. You envision a moment in Tordesillas' ruins, a monk praying, "Her soul was pure, though her body rotted." His words, though speculative, capture the tragedy noted in Chronicles. The castle, its stones crumbling, mirrors Joanna's broken reign, a throne of sorrow. You sense the echoes, the wind carrying her name, as villagers weave tales of the mad queen whose love shook a kingdom. These moments, grounded in historical accounts, make her story a mirror for our own battles with power and empathy. Joanna's tale, a blend of fact and legend, is a warning of love's cost and power's cruelty. You stand in the castle's decay, feeling her presence, a queen whose grief became her prison, whose filth was twisted into a myth to bury her. Her children ruled empires, but her voice, silenced by confinement, whispers of resilience. What if she had been heard? What if her court had fought for her? These questions linger, urging us to amplify the silenced, to question power's masks. Like, subscribe, and share your thoughts. How does Joanna's tragedy speak to you? Her echoes of decay call us to confront the shadows of our own time.